So as a priest, one of your duties is to practice chastity. How do you use each of these following to accomplish this? So the first one I have is self-knowledge or knowledge of personal strengths and weaknesses.
I think you need to know, I need to know as a celibate, like any Christian should know, but especially in living celibacy, what my strengths and my weaknesses are, because it's easy to fall into sin. So if I know my strengths, then I'm able to understand who I am, and I'm able to use those strengths to guide me in living a good life. And at the same time, I need to know my weaknesses so I don't fall into the trap of sinning and living an unchaste life, among other things.
That's pretty good. How do you use asceticism to practice chastity?
Well, asceticism is what roots us in the ways of God and in the ways of prayer. So I think anyone should really be a person of prayer. I mean, because it's prayer that cultivates our relationship with Jesus Christ. But I think especially as a celibate, and in particular as a priest, I need to practice asceticism in my prayer life in order to strengthen myself, in order to be the priest that Jesus calls me to be.
Sounds good. All right. How do you use God's commandments, specifically the 10 Commandments, more specifically the 6th commandment, to live out chastity?
I think we need to always root ourselves in the commandment, but especially the 6th commandment calls us not only not to engage in behaviors that we shouldn't engage in, but also reminds us that we need to be whole people, complete people. That means living a healthy lifestyle, being rooted in God, making sure God is the most important person in my life. But at the same time, it calls me to enter into healthy relationships with other people, including females, making sure that I have good friends who are male, good friends who are female, making sure that God guides those friendships. God is the foundation of those relationships, just as he's the foundation of my life. And at the same time, having good, healthy priest friends. I think as a priest, you need to have God, you need to have good lay friends, men and women, and you need to have good priest friends.
It's all about balance with other people.
Absolutely, in every way.
How does practicing other moral virtues help maintain chastity?
Well, I think again, the moral life is, for us as Christians, the moral life is living the Christian life and living according to the way Christ lived and encourages us to live. So I think if we try to live according to the commandments and the precepts of the church, rooting ourselves in prayer, then we're going to naturally live a moral life. Not that means you're going to live a perfect life, because there's always temptations, there's always ways that we sin. But I think living the moral life and rooting ourselves in what Christ and the church call us to is certainly going to help us to be what Christ calls us to be.
Of course. And finally, I think this is the most important one of all. How do you use prayer to maintain chastity?
Well, I think prayer needs to be what is our foundation and our strength. As Christians, again, in general, but especially as priests. So my prayer life is really what I cling to in order to get close to God. And I keep a regular schedule of prayer. One of the things that every priest is obliged to do is pray what we call the Liturgy of the Hours. So it's a prayer. There's a big thick prayer book, and I pray out of that prayer book like 6 times a day. So keeping to that routine, making sure that that is an important part of my schedule every day is very, very important. But at the same time, making sure that God is the center of my life. So doing that especially in prayer, but reminding myself at various times of the day that God is present to me and that I'm present to him. Again, I think especially living in our life today, there's temptations all around us. Social media brings those temptations kind of to the fore. So I think when I feel like I'm being tempted, when I feel that in some way I feel like I'm swaying or straying from where I should be, I think it's prayer that brings me back and pulls me back to where I know I should be, especially in relation to God. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think your overall theme was about balance.
Yeah.
The overall balance between God and personal relationships and keeping those good.
You have to be a balanced person. It can't be too much of one thing, because in the end, there's going to be something missing.
Exactly. I completely agree. Well, thank you so much for your time, Father.
You got it, dude.